Today, I'll be talking to Vibha Arora, who'll be teaching us how to show up differently as parents to our children. Let me introduce her briefly before I bring her on. Vibha is a transformation coach in Southern California. She's been providing a safe, judgment-free space for parents to process thoughts, feelings, beliefs, challenges, and goals for the past 12 years. Vibha has her master's degree in marriage and family therapy, is certified in a variety of subconscious modalities, and is also a certified parent and teacher positive discipline facilitator. She is an expert at uncovering patterns that are keeping parents stuck and shifting perspectives to that of limitless potential and possibilities. Vibha's passion in life is to empower parents and guide them towards their own inner wisdom, connection, purpose, and truth. Using her unique multidimensional approach, she is able to coach on mindset, heart set, and soul set levels to get to the root of issues and support her clients from going to whoa to wow. Hi, Vibha. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mental Health Break podcast and having this conversation with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So I briefly, before you joined me, I shared some background information about you and just about your expertise and training. But can you tell me more about your background as a marriage and family therapist and transformational coach, and then also who you serve in your business?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I do have my master's in marriage and family therapy. However, about 5 years ago, I decided to take the route of being a transformational coach rather than practicing as a therapist, which for me just meant that I could be more hands-on with my clients and really dig deep, and less of a clinical type of setting. And so I really serve parents and entrepreneurs and women that are looking to make some type of transformation in their life. Something is just not working, something is feeling overwhelming. And so they're looking for support for how to shift perspectives and do things just a little bit differently. I'm really, really excited about serving the parents that I do. I've taught parenting classes and hold parenting groups and work with a lot of parents, basically on showing them a different way that we can do this really difficult job of parenting.
So I'm sure, given parenting in this COVID era, 2020 has completely changed everything with parents, with the
Yes.
stress that they're dealing with. How have you been
Mhm.
supporting parents, and what typical issues are you noticing since the whole lockdown and homeschooling when it comes to parenting and discipline?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what's really interesting to me is how many parents pre COVID were so anti the idea of homeschooling or online schooling or any type of schooling other than the traditional way that that they've always known. And with COVID, it wasn't a choice. Like our kids were forced into this different way of learning. And what I'm noticing in a lot of my clients is we have kids that are actually thriving now way more than they were before. Not all of them, but many of them, because of the fact that they have the opportunity to be learning in a way that is not traditional. So, in a way that is more self paced, in a way that is more relaxed. And I think it's been a difficult adjustment for parents. And yet they're learning this idea. One of the things that I stress is, what do you actually have control of? So they're being forced really to see what they do have control of and what they don't. And that change, that adjustment has really made a big difference in how they're parenting and how their kids are learning.
I am noticing that a lot of my patients are actually doing better with online school, but I'm just worried about the parents who are under a ton of stress and trying to work from home and juggle it all, and the kids are getting bored. I mean, I know my own daughter really misses being around her friends, but on the other hand, she's really thriving academically because this is, like you said, less distractions and really focused learning, I guess. What exactly are you noticing as far as issues that the kids are having and issues that the parents are bringing to you because of this time?
I call them kidults because they're older now. I have a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I'm not going to lie, I am so thankful that I'm not in the school age right now, because I cannot imagine the additional stress that this must put on all parents who are already, it's hard enough. One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of parents is they're actually relieved to not have to deal with all the extracurriculars, the something planned every day for after school and the running around with the kids from soccer to music to everything else. So that's been a positive. On the flip side of that, as far as challenging, um, most parents aren't designed to be teachers. We don't really know how to step into that role. And it's very difficult when the parent is also, the teacher and enforcing things that a school system was doing before. And so overwhelm of feeling like they have to do it all, overwhelm of the pressure that they're putting on themselves as parents, as well as what their friend circle is doing, trying to keep up with how everybody else is doing Zoom learning. I think that's been a really a heavy issue that a lot of parents have been struggling with, as well as not having or feeling like they don't have enough time. There's just not enough hours in the day. And the first thing that they're letting go of, that they're cutting off the list, is their own self-care, which is to their detriment. Because as we know, you have to be able to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. And that's not just a trend, that is a fact. So I'm noticing a lot of parents are disregarding their own personal needs because there's so much to do. As far as the kids, you mentioned it's while they may be thriving academically, they do miss the social aspect. And so it's really hard to not have that, what you're used to of being able to connect with your friends. And because of that, we're seeing kids who are wanting to spend even more time on screens because that's the only way that they can socialize now. So there's been some adjustments, but I think overall, from what I've seen with my clients, they're doing the best they possibly can given all the circumstances that we're under right now.
I think everybody is, like, this past year has been doing the best they can,
Mm-hmm.
and adjusting and pivoting. And it's a matter of being just flexible, right? And not holding on to the way it used to be because everything has changed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And what a life lesson, this idea of plans, I think that we had that we could actually have control, it was just an illusion anyway. And what an incredible light to shine on the fact you really only have control over your own little circle of control, right? Your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own actions. Everything else is an adjustment. It's a pivot. It's a lesson.
Yes, it's always been an illusion that we have any sense of control. All we can control is our reaction and how we react to any given situation. So,
Exactly.
uh, I think it's really important to be aware and try to let go of some control and prioritize things and let go of other things that might not be so important.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And it's not easy, right? Because you do have culture and you have society and you have all these norms of what you should be paying attention to and what should matter. And the fact is that we get to change that. We get to create what works best for us. There's not a competition here. We're all in this together, really. In different stages of our life, of course, but it's nobody's getting away from having to adjust.
Exactly. And like you said, we're all in this together and there is no competition and we just need to focus on what works for our families.
Mhm.
But when it comes to being a positive parent facilitator, what have you noticed are some of the root causes of behavior issues in children?
Yeah. So when I am helping my parents with support and giving them different perspectives to see parenting through a different lens, I'm really relying heavily on Positive Discipline by Dr. Jane Nelson and Conscious Parenting by Dr. Shafali Sabari. And I kind of put these two concepts together and really create this like woe to wow idea of parenting, of how we can go from overwhelm to actually being content. And so the underneath all of our kids' behaviors, we have to get to the root of the root cause of the behavior, as you were saying. And it's not that they're out to get us. It's not that they're out to make us miserable. There's actually reasons for their behavior. And it's been presented many times like an iceberg. We only see the tip of the iceberg, the behavior or the misbehavior. So if we look beneath the iceberg and we actually get to the root of behavior, there's actually four, we call them mistaken goals. They're either coming from attention, a need for attention, a need for power, an assumed inadequacy, like they feel like they're not good enough, or it's revenge, and not revenge against the parent, but because they have some deep feelings that are getting in the way. Those feelings aren't being validated, so they show up in misbehaving ways, right? The kid who doesn't listen, the one who talks back, the one who's not following the rules, the one who's fighting with their sibling. They show up in all different types of ways. But once we understand the root, we can actually put solutions at that level that magically then change the misbehaviors. So that's what I really work on from the positive discipline standpoint of getting to the root. And then the conscious parenting part is looking underneath that same iceberg for parents. There's a reason that we're triggered by certain things that our kids do, and it's not the thing, it's what it represents. So we get underneath the parenting, as far as the parent goes, what their iceberg is, where's that coming from? And it usually has to do with our own childhood. So when you put both of those together, that's where we really get the magical transformation, because they're solutions that we're applying at a level that lasts for long term.
That's so important because I didn't even realize when I became a parent all the issues and the triggers that I had until my child started pushing them. And I didn't even know that those were issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always credit my training, my background as a psychologist, as a school psychologist, to really helping me navigate this whole parenting thing. It is really, really hard. It's one of the hardest jobs that we're going to have. And if you have more than one child, that makes it even more difficult because they're all different. You think that you
Yes.
got mastered the first one and then the second one comes and they're completely different. And so how do you support the parents as far as in dealing with their own issues beneath the iceberg? What are some skills that you provide for them and give them in order to help understand themselves better so that they can be better parents for their kids?
Excellent question. Yeah. And, to your point, I think the universe has a really funny sense of humor. There's no way you're going to get two kids that are the same, right? Because they got to keep you on your toes. So you'll think that you have it and you understand. And then each of our kids, each child, each human being is so distinct and unique, and the wiring is so different. And that's another thing that we look at, in this parenting. When we do the woe to wow parenting, we're also looking at the energetic elements of how this child is wired versus how you're wired. And I give different tools to support based on the individual child. So there's no like blanket, this solution will work for everyone. However, when it comes to conscious parenting, the first thing is that when a parent is willing to look at their own stuff, that's an act of courage, because it's really difficult for us to look in the mirror. It's much easier for us to point the finger. It must be the kid. Let's fix the kid. But when we actually turn that spotlight around, that's where I believe the most potential for growth as human beings lies. When we can, with an open mind and an open heart, really start to look at some of these patterns. Everything is a pattern. And if a trigger is showing up, I help parents reconnect, trace that trigger back to where it came from. Again, generally something that happened in their own childhood, and how we can kind of use an elixir almost to understand that, to pay attention to it, and to heal that piece of us, so that then we can show up with our kids with that trigger not even being, it doesn't exist, so there's nothing to push anymore because we've healed it, right? We've gone through the process of our own healing so that we can show up whole for our kids.
One thing that I really help my patients understand is they might come in and say, my child has anxiety, and they don't even recognize the fact that they themselves have anxiety, and that a lot of these mental illnesses and behavior issues can be genetically passed on from one generation to the
Mm-hmm.
next.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't recognize that underlying issue, that this could be a genetic issue, this could be, we might, with our own anxiety, be exacerbating the child's behavior. With our own reactions, we're adding to them misbehaving. So do you actually go in and help these parents, or do you work with the kids? What is the process of how you help them understand what their kids are doing, and then help them understand what their own issues are?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the genetic component. And I think it's really important to understand that while there is a genetic component, that does not mean that if you have anxiety, your child will also definitely have anxiety, right? There's an opportunity for your child to have a childhood or an existence that is different than your own experience. And usually, how we break that chain, and typically things like this are passed down from generation to generation, simply because nobody has taught us that there's a different way that we can go about things. We do what's comfortable and what's known, and we parent typically the way that we've been parented. So if you have been passed on this component of anxiety, for example, from your own parents, unless you choose to do something differently, you're going to pass that to your child as well. There's an energy that happens, and they can sense it, even if you don't say anything. So to your point of how do I work with parents and kids to support the family, Typically, what it looks like is a parent will come to me with a child that they feel is misbehaving. My kid just won't listen. My kid doesn't respect me. My kid, blows off homework. Fix my child. And while I do meet with children and I do support teens, in that situation, I'll probably meet with the kid once or twice. But then who I really need in that session is the parent, because the child is just showing up what the parent is, like they're mirroring what the parent is showing. So the real solutions come at the parent level. Again, like in order to do this, though, the parents need to have an open mind and an open heart. They have to be in the right space of willing to look at their own stuff. And when that happens and we're able to really examine that, everything just unlocks. All limitations are completely changed. Transformation happens. Because I'm also trained and certified in subconscious modalities, I'm able to hit both the conscious part and the parts that probably are repressed, that they haven't thought about for a long time. And we can go and unlock those as well. So you can see things like anxiety not disappear overnight, but definitely start to shift and become less and less, with the willingness for the parent to grow and introspect.
I mean, it's one thing to deal. I mean, we definitely need to focus on dealing with our own internal issues, but as parents, we're competing with so much externally, with everybody being online. The kids are everything is video games and shows and YouTube and TikTok. I mean, I know that affects the smaller kids, but they're more manageable with behaviors, and positive intervention can work. But how do you bridge the gap between the teens? That makes it really, really difficult. I have a teen and I'm having, a hard time competing with that, because that's an instant dopamine hit for them.
Yep.
And of course they're drawn to the online and the social aspect of it, while what we're offering is not going to compete. What have you found as far as how to help people, and what are the solutions or the options or the obstacles? I don't even know. What have you found, and what answers do you have?
Yeah, screen time has been an issue for parents since screens have been an issue. And especially now, in these COVID times where, again, things are more on screen. So kids are on screens more because they're on for school and because it's their way of socializing. And to your point, there's really no competition. That dopamine that a screen gives, you're not going to be able to match that. However, we can create boundaries around screen time. To say that you can't have any screen time is not practical. And that's when you're going to force a child to go into the behaviors like sneaking around your back or lying about it, or, we don't want to encourage that either. So we have to be reasonable. Screens are a part of our culture and our society, and they're not going anywhere. How can we balance that and teach our kids and our teens to balance the time that they spend on screen with the time that they're doing something else, something that's engaging? And while it might not always be as interesting or as entertaining, can we set parameters? Can we say, this many hours a day for screens, and can we hold that boundary? The other thing that's really important when it comes to screen times, and parents think twice about this, it's not about our kids necessarily listening. We're not looking to create a hierarchy of I'm the boss and you shall listen to me. That's like a very old model of parenting that, quite frankly, we're seeing does not work anymore. So with a revolutionary model in which we're looking as equals and we have mutual respect for one another, we're going to want to embody that we want to see in our kids or in our teens. So if you don't want your teen to be on the screen as much as he or she is, and yet you're constantly hooked to your phone, and your excuse is, oh, but this is for work, that's not going to fly. So we really need to embody, not just role model, but truly embody what it is that we want our teens to see. And this also comes back to circle of control. How much is in our control? While we don't have control, we can have influence. So we can set boundaries. But at some point, we also have to realize that as they grow older, the individuation aspect of self-development is a natural part of what's going to happen. And the choices, and this is hard for parents, but the choices that our teens make are not always going to line up with how we would like them to choose or what we would like them to choose. So there's a lot of surrender in this parenting thing. And that's why I think it's, to your point, the hardest job on the planet.
And it is difficult. And what you said was setting boundaries. But what I'm noticing with my patients, and that's where they're struggling when they're trying to
Mhm.
set limits, when they're trying to set boundaries, that's when the behavior issues happen. That's where the defiance happens. And so a lot of parents are like, I don't know what to do. It's
Mhm.
too much of a fight. It's too much energy for me to battle this. And so the
Mhm.
kid ends up getting what they want and negatively being reinforced as far as like,
Mhm.
well, if you want something, have a fit, then you can end up having it, right?
Mhm.
That's where the challenge is trying to create that balance.
Right, right. And, I think when we see it as a us against them, we're setting it up to be a battle. And it doesn't need to be. And that's when we get rid of the hierarchy of like, I'm the parent, I know best, you will listen to me. And when we actually connect with our kids and have space for open conversations and really understand where they're coming from, then it helps us to create boundaries that are both kind and firm at the same time, which is a positive discipline concept. Like foundational a foundational piece of positive discipline is that you can be kind and firm at the same time. It doesn't have to be either or. We can have both. So when you have an understanding, if you're saying you can only have 1 hour of screen time a day, for example, and your teen is saying, and there's room for him or her to say, yeah, but my friends don't get online until 9 o'clock. And then, this is the only time that I have to really hang out with them is online. Then we can have some different understanding and we can be flexible in our boundaries so that the same way when we negotiate with an adult, we're getting both people's needs met. We want to aim for those win-win solutions so that there isn't the need for defiance or power tripping or throwing tantrums or negative reinforcement. We're actually on the same page. I, as a parent, can put aside my, you should only be on the screen for an hour, and I can bend a little, and my child or teen can bend a little as well, and we can meet in the middle where it feels good to both of us. That's how we set it up for success, right?
I think it's so important to have a connection and have a really good collaborative connection with your kids, but it should start really early on. I think if you're giving your kids everything they want without setting any boundaries or any limits until they become teenagers, and then you start cracking down on the rules and the law, that's when you're going to get the defiance. That's when you're going to get the pushback because they're not used to having those limits. And this is at a time when they're trying to separate and individuate
Mm-hmm.
and become their own people.
Mm-hmm.
So for those people that don't have that connection with their kids, and then they're having a very volatile interaction with the teenagers, trying to set limits, how do you support them? I feel like that would be really, really difficult.
Yes. And I think what makes it more difficult is a parent feeling like it's too late. Like I missed my chance. I missed my opportunity. Now I'm stuck with this. I created this monster. Now I have to deal with it. And I try seeing things through a different lens in that it's never too late. We are human beings. We're parenting for the first time. How would you have possibly known what you didn't know before? And you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to change your heart. And while it may be a little more difficult, it's not impossible. Even with our teens, even when they're 15, 16, it doesn't matter their age. What matters, I think, is the intention and being very transparent with that and saying to our child, again, coming to their level, meeting them where they are and saying, look, I've done some things as a parent that I'm trying to work on and do differently. So things are going to look a little different around here. And here's why. It's not because I want this power trip. It's not because I want control over you. It's because there are things that I want to be able to give you, such as judgment skills, the ability to balance, responsibility and privileges. And so that's something I'm working on and owning it as your own thing. And also, to your point, you cannot try to put limitations in place without connecting first. It means that until you have that connection, you're really just talking to a wall. They have to believe, one, you're not out to get them, two, you're on their team. And how do you do that? Even with a teenager, even when you've missed all the time before, is you make the time now. How do you get into their world and connect? Become an ally first, and then we're able to talk about the boundaries that need to be put in place.
I know that a lot of parents feel like you said, it's too late, or they're teenagers, they don't need me anymore. But what I
Yeah.
found in therapy and in my own personal relationship with my child is that they need us more than ever when they're teens, and they need that guidance, they need that support. and they need that connection. And if you're not able to do this on your own, because it is very difficult, and I will always tell every person I work with that if I didn't have my background and my training, I would probably be a horrible parent. I wouldn't know what to do. This is not something that we intuitively know. We're navigating a world that is completely different than what we grew up in, what our parents grew up in. And so we need support. We need to work with people like you. We need to work with coaches. We need to work with therapists to help us understand our kids and rebuild that relationship and rebuild that connection, because doing it on your own can create more damage. I feel like if you don't know what you're doing, if it's constantly volatile, it's constantly a battle, reach out, talk to somebody and get the help that you need, or educate yourself and learn. There are books, there are podcasts, there are trainings that you can get involved in, but also reach out and find a therapist or a coach.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that's what makes parenting so difficult is we put ourselves into this bubble. And because, in this Instagram world and everybody looks so perfect with their smiling children, and you don't know what happened behind that picture, right? And I say this all the time when we take a picture with my kids and I, the 5 minutes before that, it was a complete hot mess, right? And then the picture shows up and that's what the world sees. It's not perfect. And I often tell parents, it can be messy and magical at the same time, but it takes work and it takes intention and it takes focus. And there's no way that we were designed to do this by ourselves. And that's again, it's another illusion that parents think that everybody's got it all figured out. Nobody does, and oftentimes as a parent coach, people, my clients will say, oh, well, you have it all figured out because you're a parent coach. No, coaches have coaches. I get help with parenting because while my kids are at a different stage, I've never been the parent to a 20-year-old boy before or a 23-year-old girl. So I still need support. And I think really normalizing that, especially in different communities, there's access, but are people actually tapping in to get it? There's so much cultural stigma, I feel, around so many of our different ethnic groups that you're not supposed to talk about personal problems outside of the home, right? And so then those people not only have the belief that they're supposed to figure it out on their own, but they're almost hesitant to get help because what that means, what they've been culturally conditioned to believe that means. So I want to just encourage, there is support out there. There are people that are willing to help. There are resources. It's confidential and it's a game changer. It's like not putting on glasses when you can't see. There's no need to go through life having everything be blurry when you can simply put on a pair of glasses.
Well, one thing we forget about is that 100 years ago, we lived in communities. We had elders, we had people to guide us and support us. We had neighbors, we had family members. And it literally took a village to raise a child. Everybody else kept an eye on your child. You kept an eye on their child. And we had that support. We learned from other people's mistakes and their wisdom. We're living in very isolated communities now. And there's this mom petition where you're competing with other moms or other parents and trying to outdo each other, keeping up with the Joneses. And because of that, it's important to reach out and find somebody that can support you, because you might not necessarily feel comfortable talking about your shortcomings as a parent with your neighbor or your yoga buddy or whatever, but find somebody that can help you so that you're not feeling so isolated and alone and feeling like you have to do all of this yourself. It is impossible to do it all by yourself as a parent nowadays.
Exactly. And you are guaranteeing burnout. And that burnout is going to affect not only you, but your kids, your family, and your mental health as well as physical health. It's just not worth it. When, especially, even though we are isolated, I feel like we have more resources than we've ever had before. The help is available, the support is available, and it's a courageous, brave step to reach out and get it, but it is, I believe, the key. I believe it is the key to be able to turn things around. And this idea that you have to do it alone is such an outdated one. That's no longer necessary. The competition, the keeping up with the Joneses, I always tell my parents, my clients, to just remember who you tuck in at the end of the night. Who are you tucking in? Because that's the person that matters the most, not the neighbor, not the kid down the street. It's you and your family.
Yeah. But a lot of times we feel so like you said, we get to burnout level. We are so
Mhm.
overwhelmed. We're so stressed. We're trying to do everything perfectly. I remember when somebody on online posted how to support parents who want to be perfect, basically wanting to encourage perfection in parenting. I was like,
Mm,
that is such a dangerous word to use when it comes to parenting. I really
yes.
love the good enough parent. Just do the best that you can.
Yeah.
Be there for your parent because your time is way, no matter how flawed it is way more valuable than any money you're throwing at them or any other experiences.
Mhm.
Your time. But how can you give of yourself and give time when you're running on empty yourself? So, can
Right.
you talk a little bit about the importance of self care when it comes to being a good present parent to your child?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think it's fundamental. I think that if you are not, and it's that same thing that I'm sure you've heard, you've got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help your child. And we say it and we hear it, and yet very few of us actually follow it. And it becomes to our detriment and to the family's detriment, because a burned out parent is of no use at all to a kid. It's going to actually make the situation worse. So although it sounds counterintuitive that I'm now going to step away for an hour and do something just to fill my own cup, that is exactly what we need to do. And the imagery that I like to use is that when we fill our cup, what we are able to give is from that overflow. You can't give from a tap that's barely dripping, right? You want that flow to be there. And in order to create that, we have to be refueling and refilling ourselves. And then again, a lot of cultures, mothers especially, are seen more like the martyr. Like, you're supposed to sacrifice, you're supposed to give up your time, give up all of the things that bring you joy and put the kid first. But that actually ends up backfiring. And along with your point about perfection, there is no perfection, and not taking care of yourself, that's not helping you any at all. When you are not taking care of yourself and you're striving for perfection, think about what you're showing your child. That child who is one day going to be an adult is going to believe that they too need to be perfect, and that they too should not be prioritizing self-care because they never saw their parent do it, so it must be wrong. So we're creating a whole new generation of parents who are then going to sacrifice themselves again, and they're going to end up with these families in which they feel overwhelmed, ineffective. There's a lot of turmoil and arguments and all that stuff going on at home. Don't get me wrong, taking care of yourself is not the only way that all these things are going to magically solve themselves, but you have to start with a full cup before you can go from there.
Well, not only are some cultures actually glamorizing and encouraging the martyr syndrome of put yourself last,
Mm,
but also the biggest mistake we make is putting the child first.
yeah.
I know that initially when I heard that, it's like, of course the child comes first. They're my responsibility. But if you don't put if you don't put yourself first and then your relationship second, and the child third, you're going to end up with all of them falling apart. If you're not going to be well enough to be there, and you're mentally not well, you're emotionally breaking down, you're burnt out, that's caused your relationship or your marriage to fall apart. If that foundation is broken, how can you guys be there for the child? So the child should be third, and then putting yourself first and taking care of your relationship, because all you have is a good 18 years with that kid. Then they're going to go off and become adults. Meanwhile, if you didn't invest in yourself or your relationship, you end up with nothing at the end of it. You don't have
Mhm.
a sense of self. You don't have a good marriage or relationship to fall back on. And then everything falls apart then, and people end up having the major issues with the empty nest syndrome. So
Mhm.
I said too much, but I mean, it's all connected, and it all builds up, right?
Absolutely. And to your point, it does sound counterintuitive to not put the child first. But when you put a child first ahead of your own needs, what you create is entitlement, right? The kid now expects that their every whim is going to get met, and they're not learning life skills. That's what it's about. When I do parenting coaching with my clients, we're not talking about just here and now, just this 10-year-old or 12-year-old. We're talking about who this human being is going to be when they do go out on their own, right? It's this idea of, it's not about right now, it's the long-term effects of what you're doing as a parent. What kind of skill set are you equipping your child with if you're constantly putting them first? clearly they're then going to go into the world and be very surprised when in the workplace or in other relationships, they're not first. They're not going to know what to do with that because we haven't prepared them. If we protect them from everything, where is their life experience coming from?
Right.
What is their understanding of what it means to be a mom or a parent? Like, what is that supposed to look like? We're actually doing them a disservice. And for what? What are we gaining from that?
But like you said, when you put them first and you teach them that it's okay to put yourself last and not take care of yourself, you're teaching them to not take care of themselves and not focus on meeting their own needs so that they're not dependent on everybody else to make them happy. And you're not preparing them for adulthood and all the shock that that's going to bring with them.
Right. What you're preparing them for is for them to be a client with me, which is lovely, but wouldn't you rather put that money towards other use? We have an opportunity, a unique opportunity with this generation, with the amount of access and resources that we have. We can really break some patterns that have been, generations. We have a chance to really change that for their future, for our kids and for their kids too.
And making sure to separate what was healthy and nurturing growing up versus what was toxic. Just because your parents did it doesn't mean that you automatically have to carry that forward and perpetuate it. Just even with corporal punishment and physically hitting kids. Yeah, you might have grown up with that and you might think you turned out okay, but that is not okay anymore. And that is not okay for your kids to go through that. There are other ways to communicate discipline and guidance and support and correction without resorting to child abuse or even spanking. It's not teaching them. It's giving you that the instant gratification of calming the behavior in that moment, but you're creating long-term issues. So it's important to pay attention to that as well.
Absolutely. And I would just add to that, the amount of parents that were spanked as kids, and disciplined, and they all say, look at me, I'm fine. And my response to that is, how do you know who you would have been and how you would show up in the world if never a hand was laid on you? You don't have that knowledge. And I believe that, it's not about blaming our parents. I think our parents did the best with what they had. And again, now we have different resources. We have scientific proof. We have brain studies that show us what's effective and what's not effective. And when we put hands on our kid, it's a control thing. We're showing them when you don't like behavior in somebody else, you can slap them into submission to get what you want. And then we wonder why these become adults who then get, charged with assault or domestic violence. Because if that's all they've learned, that's the tool they've known, that this is how you get control. Again, we're perpetuating that cycle.
And I know for myself, when I want to get to that level, like if I've been pushed to that level, I'm the one having a meltdown at that moment.
Yeah.
And I need to make sure that I'm calming myself down so I don't do anything drastic. And so paying attention to, I've seen consistently when parents resort to actually hitting kids, they're losing control at that point and trying to regain it by taking it out on that innocent child. So we need to pay attention to our own emotions and seeing what's happening to me right now that I've lost so much control that I want to hurt this child. And I know that all of us go through that. I know that this is why parenting is so difficult. We're constantly teetering on that fine line of making sure we're constantly making decisions. Is this going to be good for them long term? Is this going to help them or hurt them? And so the more we take care of ourselves, the more we pay attention to our own triggers, the more we pay attention to what's going to set us off, the more present we'll be for our kids and the healthier our relationship will be with them as well.
Absolutely. And as a parent, you need to have those skills. Most of us weren't taught how to regulate our emotions. Most of us weren't even taught how to recognize our emotions, right? So being able to, when you say, as parents, we need to calm down, we also need to know how to calm down, right? What is going to work for us? Where is our toolbox that we can dip into? And I think that so much of this is because we live in this instant society. We feel like everything has to happen in the moment. And we're allowed to pause. We're allowed to step away. We're allowed to take that break so that we can go from reactive behavior into a responsive behavior. And that takes learning and that takes skills. It takes practice and it takes support. It's very difficult to do that by yourself, right?
Exactly. And this is what I mean when if it wasn't for my training, I probably would have resorted to having that meltdown and taking my anger out on a child when I could have done otherwise. But it's because I learned and I knew better and I was taught to do better that I made better choices. One of the things that I did early on was teach my child that it's okay for me to take a timeout and for her to take a timeout. And timeout was not a punishment. It was an
Right.
opportunity for us to separate and regroup. It was very difficult at first, but then once she got it, she understood it. And when I would send her in a timeout, I would be in a timeout, calming down, and she'd be calming down. And that made a huge difference in our relationship. And for her to feel safe and knowing that that's something that's for her protection.
Right. And to your point, positive timeouts are really, really helpful. Punitive timeouts are really going to mess things up because then you get
Mhm.
into revenge and power and all that. And actually, to your point, we're the ones that need the timeout. The kid doesn't need anything. When it gets to that point of being able to say, you know what, mom needs to take a timeout. I'm going to go chill in my room for a while. I'll come back in 15 minutes and we can finish talking. Whether the kid plays Legos, watches TV, does YouTube, whatever, that's irrelevant because you're taking that time out for you so that you can get yourself back together and come into the situation with more calmness and more perspective than you had in that moment, right? And again, embodying that, what is the child learning? Oh, when things get heated, you're allowed to not abandon or run away or escape the situation, but you're allowed to take a break. You're allowed to pause, regroup, and come back. And then they start doing that too. And a little caveat, be sure to be warned that when you start embodying this, there will come a time where your child will say to you, hold on, I need a minute. I'm going to go think about things and I'll be back. And you'll be like, wait, what just happened? That's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, we need to take the negative connotation away from the word timeout because it should be a positive thing. And I've used it since she was little, and it makes a huge difference in calming ourselves down, getting perspective. Because we even in an angry outburst, we think we went from 0 to 60 really quickly, but really, if we stop, we have plenty of time to react if we teach ourselves to pause and
Yeah.
think about things before we say them, before we do them. And that's what it comes down to. So a lot of it is on us as the adults with our developed brains to make the better choices, because we cannot expect a little kid to think the way we do as fully grown adults with fully developed frontal cortex. And we can actually make plans and make decisions or have remorse or even think about our consequences. Kids
Right.
can't do that. So the burden is on us.
Absolutely. It's the burden and it's also the opportunity, right? Because
Yes.
this is allowing us the space to heal the things that do bother us, the things that do trigger us, that when we were 10 or 12, they bothered us then too, but we didn't have the skill set. We didn't have, to your point, we didn't have the cognition or the ability from a brain science perspective to do anything with those feelings. So now our children are our biggest mirrors, and they're going to show us all of our stuff that hasn't been resolved. And what a beautiful opportunity for us to do our work.
It is a wonderful opportunity because, like I said, I didn't even know I had some of those issues until I had a child. So,
Right, right.
and they really are a huge mirror, and they reflect back to us, and they force us to look at things that need to be looked at. And that's what I'm grateful for. I needed to look at those things because it helped me become a better person, have more insight into my life, have more insight into my whatever I was dealing with that needed to be healed. So, but we need to be able to help them at the same time and not cause more damage, and be more mindful about their little world and how our behavior is going to impact them.
Absolutely. Exactly.
So, knowing what you know now, everything about parenting, everything we just talked about, what advice would you have for your younger self?
Ooh, that's a great question. Trust your intuition, trust your gut. It doesn't have to look the way it looks for everybody else. You're unique. You get to do it your way. And really embracing, like I said, this opportunity. Parenting is a chance for me to grow as a human being. It's not a job that I need to check off the boxes for. It's a beautiful opportunity, and to enjoy it and be okay with the fact that not every moment is going to be enjoyable, and that's okay.
Perfectly said.
Mhm.
Where can people find you and connect with you or work with you if they wanted to? And if you're on social media, where can people follow you?
Yes, I am on social media on Instagram and Facebook. The easiest way to find me would probably be with hashtag iParentPlus, um, just because my name is hard to spell. And they can also go to my website. I actually have an ongoing Woe to Wow parenting program where I take parents through a whole group experience and we break down, positive discipline and conscious parenting concepts to give them that high touch support that they really need, as well as group support and Facebook, a Facebook community in which we can all share openly our parenting struggles and successes. So, yeah, I'm out there on social media. I'm sure that I'll give you the links and you can have your audience find me there.
I'll definitely include it in the show notes.
Great.
What's your handle on Instagram?
It's Vibha. So on Instagram, it's Vibha, my first name, Aurora dash. It's a little complicated because evidently there's another Vibha Aurora out there. Go figure. So the hashtag iParentPlus will take you to me. That's
Okay,
probably the easiest way.
sounds good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll definitely include all that in the show notes and people can find you and reach out to you.
Yes, absolutely. And whether you choose to work with me as a parent coach or if you just want to share an experience that you're having or a challenge, I love hanging out and talking with parents and just really, again, being able to provide that shift in perspective. Sometimes all it takes is one little chat message and it's like, oh, I didn't see it that way, and I love being able to make that kind of a difference in a parent's world because it affects the child, it affects the family, and that just feels good to me.
Well, I'm glad there are coaches like you out there helping parents because in this day and time, we definitely need support and we need to reach out and get the help. There's no shame in it. This is not something we should be knowing how to do intuitively. It's a learned experience. It's a learned behavior. And so I'm glad that you're doing this. And I thank you for taking the time and being here and sharing your experience with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. It's such an important topic, and I appreciate you shining the light on this.